Imagine sitting down to play this ridiculously complex board game with a group of your friends.
Okay.
The board is set up, the pieces are handed out, and everyone just starts playing. I mean, they are making these strategic moves, collecting points, advancing super fast.
Right, they know what they're doing.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Everyone else at the table was handed a detailed rulebook before the game started. You were handed absolutely nothing.
Just expected to, figure it out by magic.
Literally nothing. So you're sitting there desperately trying to guess the rules just by watching what the person next to you is doing.
Yeah.
You're making mistakes, you're getting penalized, and you're just watching everyone else pull further and further ahead. You would probably feel incredibly frustrated.
Oh, absolutely. I'd probably want to flip the table.
Right. You'd want to quit.
Yeah.
And welcome to today's deep dive. Because for a massive percentage of students, that board game scenario isn't just some metaphor. It is the exhausting daily reality of navigating a classroom with an undiagnosed learning disorder.
It perfectly captures the cognitive load we're talking about today.
It really does. So today we have this fascinating stack of source material for you. It's excerpts from a brief titled Comprehensive Student Mental Health and Dyslexia Support Systems.
A very thorough brief, I might add.
Very thorough. And our mission on this deep dive is to kind of bypass those surface level definitions of dyslexia that you've probably heard a million times. We want to really explore the hidden neurobiological and, frankly, the emotional realities of it.
Yes.
And then we're going to look at a real-world case study. There's this program in Georgia called MentalSpace School, and we'll see how they are completely re-architecting the way schools deliver integrated mental health and academic support.
And that word right there, integrated, that is the key. Because for decades, our educational systems have treated academic processing and mental health as two entirely separate silos.
Right, like the biology department is over here and psychology is down the hall.
Exactly. Well, the data in our sources makes it undeniably clear that you just cannot treat a neurobiological difference without addressing the, psychological fallout it creates.
Yeah. So let's get right into the mechanics of that. Because to understand why we need this massive systemic support, we first have to understand the specific neurological hurdles.
Right.
And I want to start with the numbers, because the brief notes that 1 in 5 students has dyslexia.
20%.
20%. So I'm looking at this statistic, and honestly, my first thought is, how can our education system be this blind? I mean, if 20% of kids have this processing difference, the system isn't just like occasionally missing them. The system is fundamentally designed to ignore them, right?
It is a very sharp way to look at it. And neurobiology actually explains why the system is so easily able to ignore them.
How so?
Well, we know, and anyone who follows this space knows, that dyslexia is not a vision problem.
Right. It's not seeing letters backwards, which
Right.
is the big myth.
Exactly. It's not laziness. It's definitely not an indicator of low intelligence. It is a specific neurobiological difference in how the brain processes language.
Okay, so what is actually happening in the brain then? Like physically?
So if you look at fMRI scans of a neurotypical brain reading, you see these high levels of activation in the left hemisphere, particularly in areas responsible for, like, word analysis and automatic word recognition.
Okay.
The brain is taking a visual symbol, mapping it to a sound, and extracting meaning almost instantly. But in a dyslexic brain, those specific neural pathways are just less active.
So it's a routing issue.
Exactly. The brain is forced to route that visual to auditory translation through different, much less efficient pathways. You see the signs early on, like difficulty connecting letters to sounds, really slow reading, frequent spelling errors,
Right.
and total avoidance of reading aloud.
It makes me think of a high-end supercomputer trying to download massive amounts of data, but it's forced to connect through a 1990s dial-up modem.
That is a great analogy.
Because the processing power of the computer, like the intelligence, the comprehension, the creativity, is completely intact. It's massive. But the intake mechanism, that modem, is stalling out the whole machine.
That is precisely it. The hardware routing is different. But because you cannot literally see a dial-up modem operating inside a student's head.
Right, you can't see the brain working.
Yeah, not the way you can see them, say, squinting at a blackboard if they needed glasses. Because it's invisible, the adults in the room misinterpret the output.
So they see the slow reading or the guessing at words, and they misdiagnose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They diagnose it as a behavioral issue. They label it a lack of effort or just distraction.
Which is devastating. I mean, if the adults are telling you that your dial-up modem is actually just a character flaw, you're going to internalize that.
You are. And that invisible nature of this processing difference explains the chronic underdiagnosis. Because the school system is built to measure the speed of the download, not the power of the supercomputer.
Wow.
So these kids go years without the intervention that would actually remap those pathways.
And that delay is where the real damage happens, isn't it? Our sources focus heavily on this ripple effect.
They do.
When a student goes undiagnosed for years, they aren't just missing out on reading skills. They are accumulating this massive amount of psychological stress. The brief actually uses the term academic self.
Yes, a damaged academic self.
Right. Let's unpack the psychological mechanics of that. Because it's like carrying a backpack filled with rocks, right? And every school year, someone just adds another rock.
That's exactly how it feels. You have a highly capable child placed in an environment for, 7 hours a day, where their specific neurobiological difference makes the primary currency of success incredibly difficult.
The currency being decoding text.
Right. Imagine running a sprint in waist-deep water while everyone else is on a dry track.
You're going to be exhausted.
They're completely exhausted,
Right.
and you're finishing last every single time. And because you don't know about the water, you just assume you were a terrible runner. When a child internalizes that failure at age 6 or 7, it wires their brain for chronic stress. The very act of opening a book triggers a cortisol response. They start to believe, I am not smart. I am broken.
And that doesn't just stay in English class. How does that bleed into their overall mental health outside the classroom?
Well, you cannot compartmentalize a child's self-esteem. That untreated neurobiological difference inevitably morphs into a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
We see students develop severe generalized anxiety about school.
Or they act out, right? I mean, if you know you're going to fail the spelling test, it's socially safer to flip the desk and get sent to the principal's office for being a rebel
Exactly.
than it is to sit there and be exposed as quote-unquote stupid in front of your peers.
Behavioral deflection is a survival mechanism, plain and simple. And this raises a critical point in the briefs: why academic intervention alone, when it's delivered years too late, is never enough. You can eventually teach a middle schooler with dyslexia to read using specialized methods. But if you do not actively address the psychological scars of those early years, the deeply ingrained anxiety and the damaged self-worth, the academic intervention won't stick.
Because the cortisol response is still there.
Exactly. The brain is still treating the classroom as a threat environment.
Which brings us directly to the solution, because the problem is twofold, right?
No.
It's a hardware routing issue and a profound psychological trauma issue.
Yes.
So the solution obviously has to be a dual approach. And our sources lay out a blueprint for this. On the academic side, they point to structured literacy instruction, specifically things like the Orton-Gillingham approach and classroom accommodations like extended time or audiobooks. But I want to pause on the instruction piece. How does something like Orton-Gillingham actually fix the dial-up modem problem we talked about?
It worked by physically remapping the brain's pathways.
Wait, literally remapping?
Literally. Orton-Gillingham is highly structured and multisensory. Instead of just showing a student a letter and telling them the sound, which relies on that stalled visual to auditory pathway, it forces the brain to recruit other regions.
How so? Like, what does that look like in a classroom?
By involving motor skills. So, a student might trace a letter in sand while saying the sound out loud.
Oh, wow.
Or physically tap their fingers on their arm to break down the syllables of a word. By engaging the tactile and kinesthetic pathways simultaneously with the visual and auditory, it essentially builds a new neural bridge around the bottleneck.
It takes the guesswork out of the rule book.
Yes, it explicitly teaches the code of the English language.
That makes a lot of sense. You're giving them a different way to input the data, and then alongside that instruction, the brief highlights accommodations like audiobooks.
Right.
But let's dig into the why of accommodations. Because I think for a long time, the education system viewed things like audiobooks for reading assignments as sort of a cheat code.
Oh yeah, the old crutch argument. But that stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of cognitive load. Think about the goal of a specific assignment.
Okay.
If the goal is assessing decoding, the mechanical act of turning printed letters into sounds, then yes, the student needs to read the text. But as students progress beyond third grade, the vast majority of education is assessing comprehension.
Right, like can they grasp the historical context of the Civil War? Can they analyze the themes in a novel?
Precisely. You're testing the supercomputer, not the modem. For a student with dyslexia, decoding takes up so much working memory that by the time they get to the end of a paragraph, they have no cognitive bandwidth left.
They don't even remember what they just read.
Exactly. Providing an audiobook completely bypasses that neurobiological bottleneck. It frees up their working memory, allowing their brain to access and analyze the high-level information directly.
It sounds like we are finally shifting from telling kids to just try harder to actually changing the architecture of how they learn. It levels the playing field.
It really does.
Okay, so we have the academic side, multisensory instruction to remap the brain, and accommodations to bypass the bottleneck. But the brief insists that the second pillar, the psychological side, is equally mandatory.
Yes.
Therapy to specifically address that accumulated anxiety. And all of this, both the academic and emotional support, relies on an accurate early diagnosis by licensed clinicians and psychoeducational evaluators.
Which is, unfortunately, where the system historically breaks down.
Right, because let's be real, accessing a licensed psychoeducational evaluator, booking a private appointment, paying thousands of dollars out of pocket.
It's impossible for many.
Yeah, and then finding a specialized therapist on top of that.
Yeah.
That is a massive, impenetrable wall for a huge portion of the population.
It is.
So how does the system actually deliver this dual support to students at scale? Enter Georgia's model.
Yes. This is where we look at the case study from the brief. The MentalSpace school model. It's a K-12 mental health support framework designed specifically to integrate right into the school environment in Georgia.
And when I was reading through their operational structure, I mean, it sounded like a logistical mountain.
No, it's a huge undertaking.
They provide same-day teletherapy. They assign dedicated therapist teams directly to each school. They run crisis intervention, suicide, and violence prevention. And they are doing this with licensed, diverse, culturally competent clinicians. It's PPET and FERPA compliant. But the part that really caught my eye is the compliance and funding model.
Right.
The brief mentions they support schools in achieving HB 268 compliance with a hard deadline of July 2026. What exactly is that legislation mandating?
HB 268 is a piece of Georgia legislation that basically acts as a forcing function for schools. Historically, schools could passively wait for a child to fail severely enough before initiating an evaluation.
The wait to fail model.
Exactly. This legislation mandates that schools have active systemic frameworks in place to screen for and support these specific learning disorders and mental health needs by that July 2026 deadline.
So it shifts the burden of discovery from the panicked parent back to the educational institution.
Exactly.
Okay, so the state is forcing the school's hands. You have to build the infrastructure. But infrastructure costs money.
Always.
And this is where the MentalSpace model seems to disrupt the old gatekeeping. The brief notes they integrate with major private insurers like they list PCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana.
Yeah, all the major ones.
And Peach State, CareSource, Amerigroup. But the crucial detail is that they accept state Medicaid at $0 out of pocket for families.
That's the game changer.
Right. Providing same-day teletherapy and dedicated teams sounds great, but how does removing the financial barrier like offering $0 out of pocket for Medicaid radically change the game for these families?
It radically democratizes it. The systemic impact of integrating into the school day and making Medicaid $0, I mean, it cannot be overstated.
Because before, they just couldn't access these evaluators.
No. If you are a family on Medicaid or living in a rural area, navigating the private medical system for a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation could take a year on wait list.
Just waiting.
Assuming you could even afford the copays or find the transportation. By embedding teletherapy and diagnostic capabilities into the school infrastructure itself, MentalSpace removes both the geographic and the financial gatekeeping.
The student doesn't have to leave the building.
Exactly. The parents don't have to miss a shift at work to drive them to a clinic. The support meets the student where they already spend 7 hours a day. You can just go to mentalspaceschool.com or reach out to MentalSpace School at sheetstherapy.com, and the infrastructure is right there.
It's an ecosystem approach. Which brings up another layer of the MentalSpace model that I found really compelling. They aren't just treating the individual student in a vacuum.
Right.
The brief details that they provide wellness support for the school staff and counseling for the families. Why invest resources in treating the teachers and parents when the student is the one with the learning disorder?
Because you cannot place a healing child back into a broken or highly stressed ecosystem and expect the intervention to work.
That makes sense.
Think about the teachers. We just discussed how implementing accommodations like audiobooks or those Orton-Gillingham strategies requires intentional effort.
Yeah, you have to be actively managing it.
If a teacher is fundamentally burned out, suffering from secondary trauma, and completely overwhelmed by classroom behavioral issues, they do not have the cognitive capacity to manage individualized neurobiological accommodations.
Right. If the teacher's bandwidth is maxed out just trying to keep the room quiet, the kid who needs the audiobook is going to slip through the cracks again.
Exactly. Staff wellness is directly correlated to the fidelity of student accommodations. And the same logic applies to the parents.
Oh, for sure. Navigating the IEP process is a nightmare.
It is. Navigating the individualized education plan process, dealing with a child who comes home every day having a meltdown because their cortisol levels are through the roof.
Yeah.
It places an immense strain on the family unit. By extending counseling to the family, the MentalSpace model ensures that the adults who control the child's environment have the emotional regulation and the tools required to reinforce the support at home. It creates a cohesive, sustainable safety net.
It really highlights how interconnected the whole system is. You can't just isolate the reading score and ignore the ecosystem.
No, you can't.
So we've outlined this massive, impressive infrastructure. We have the neurobiological instruction, the psychological therapy, the legislative push from HB 268, and the barrier-free access through Medicaid integration. But the ultimate question for you, the listener, when analyzing any systemic overhaul like this is, does it actually yield results?
Well, the data and the source material provides a very clear answer to that.
It really does. The outcomes reported by the MentalSpace school program are striking. They track an 89% improved attendance rate, a 92% reduction in student anxiety, and an 85% family satisfaction rate. When I look at those numbers, specifically the link between anxiety and attendance, it feels like we're finally looking at root causes. It's like a domino effect.
That connection is the most vital insight in this entire brief. Often, school administrations view chronic absenteeism through a purely disciplinary lens.
Right, they look at a high schooler who skips first period 4 days a week and assume it's just a lack of motivation or defiance.
Exactly. But when you look at it through the neurobiological and psychological lens we've been discussing, attendance isn't the problem. Attendance is a symptom.
A symptom of feeling unsafe. By treating the root causes, like the language processing struggles and the severe anxiety, you automatically knock down secondary issues like chronic absenteeism.
Perfectly stated. Students do not want to show up to an environment where they feel academically incompetent and emotionally unsafe.
Right.
If every time you walk into a building, you are forced to run that race in waist-deep water while everyone watches you fail, of course your brain tells you to avoid that building.
You're just trying to survive.
Yes. But when you introduce a systemic dual support model, when that student finally receives the multisensory instruction that makes sense to their brain, when they are handed the audiobook that frees up their working memory, and when they have a therapist helping them unspool years of internalized shame, the primary stressor is neutralized. That 92% drop in anxiety is the direct result of the brain no longer perceiving the classroom as a threat.
And naturally, when that threat is removed, the 89% improvement in attendance follows.
Exactly. The school transforms from a place of trauma to a place of actual learning.
They stop hiding. They actually want to engage. And that really brings us full circle on the journey of today's deep dive.
It does.
We started by demystifying those 101 level assumptions about dyslexia, diving into the fMRI reality that it's a hardware routing issue, a neurobiological difference in the left hemisphere's language processing centers.
We unpacked the devastating emotional weight of forcing those students to navigate the system without the right tools.
Right, and how that damaged academic self inevitably triggers a broader mental health crisis.
And then we examined the mechanics of the solution, how integrating multisensory instruction and targeted accommodations addresses the neurobiology, while integrated therapy addresses the psychology.
Yeah, and through the MentalSpace school case study, we saw exactly how a system can scale that dual support.
By utilizing teletherapy, removing financial gatekeeping through Medicaid integration, and supporting the entire ecosystem of teachers and parents.
Exactly. Schools can actually meet legislative mandates like HB 268 and fundamentally change the trajectory for these students. It's about looking beneath the surface of a bad spelling test or a skipped class to see the complex, incredibly capable brain underneath.
And recognizing that an educational system is only as effective as its ability to support the diverse neurobiology of all its students.
Right.
We can't keep punishing the supercomputer for a faulty dial-up connection.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own. If up to 20% of our students are wired differently, and historically, they have been carrying this profound, hidden emotional weight for years before interventions ever arrive. What undiscovered talents, what unique problem-solving skills, or entirely new paradigms of thinking are we currently losing to anxiety simply because our traditional classroom environments haven't caught up to their neurobiology? Think back to that incredibly complex board game.
Yeah.
It's not just about making the game fair, it's about realizing how much better the game could be if we made sure everyone at the table actually had the rule book.